Hi guys. So yeah, this is the recording of me reading the PowerPoint and kind of the lecture part of the material for this week. Okay, so I'll just go through it for you. And when we get to some of the quotations, I'll also flip over and I'll show you those on the screen, the kind of bits that we're talking about. All right, so we'll just start. So first of all, welcome to the course. I hope that you guys are going to enjoy it. Um, I know that distance asynchronous teaching is not ideal for everyone, but for me, it is the easiest way of dealing with things at the moment. So, and I will do my best to make sure that you get everything that you can out of the course anyway. So, bear with me, and as I've said before, get in touch if you have any serious questions. So, on the course, we're going to be looking at some of the most, sorry, that should say, some of the most significant or some of the most important works in the canon of Anglophone literature from the 17th century to the present day. Each of the texts we look at features a relationship between two people. Many of them feature more, or several of them feature more than one such relationship. But that relationship is going to be the kind of paradigm through which we're going to view the text, the kind of frame that we'll use to analyze them. And as we say, these relationships might be functional, dysfunctional, beneficial, or destructive, and often they will be all of them at the same time. And we'll find that different kinds of relationships emerge in the text, but we'll also find that different kind of situations, communications, miscommunications are going to recur as we look at text from the 17th century up until the present day. So we are going to see similarities, and we're going to look at the kind of themes that emerge out of considering these texts together. And in doing that, we'll hopefully learn a bit more about the kind of relationships that two people tend to have with each other, and we might also learn a bit more about literature. So the first text we're going to look at is Macbeth, Shakespeare's famous tragedy. The play features one of the most famous, infamous marriage relationships ever written, and it's also actually one of the most touching and intimate relationships in all of Shakespeare. Shakespeare is writing at a time in which marriage is often not something which requires a degree of intimacy. It doesn't require two people to love each other, and it certainly doesn't require them to tell each other their secret or to confide and to trust each other when they speak about their deepest and darkest desires. Macbeth and his wife, Lady Macbeth, do that, and it is striking the extent to which they do it from the very start of the play when we see their interactions. So bear that in mind as we go through and talk about what we're going to talk about. And we see both how that can potentially be something quite beautiful, but we also see how when that kind of intimacy malfunctions, it's possible for two people to commit heinous acts that they would never commit on their own, and how those acts might ultimately drive those people apart and drive them to despair. Okay, so Macbeth was written and first performed probably around 1606, and the play is a tragedy, which means that it focuses on the fall from grace and untimely death of a once noble and good character. In Shakespeare's major tragedies, Macbeth, King Lear, Hamlet, and Othello, most frequently cited as the peak of his achievement in this genre, although Shakespeare did write several other plays referred to as tragedies. Romeo and Juliet, for example, is a play which is often referred to as a tragedy and which was described as a tragedy by Shakespeare himself, but it's an open question how much it really fulfills the criteria of a tragedy, which is that the fall of the individual person has to come about through a combination of their character, i.e., their personality, who they are as a person, and their circumstances. And in a tragedy, the audience, or we, witness the tragic protagonist perform actions that we know to be wrong, or at least that we understand will lead to their eventual undoing. However, at the same time, we also understand that this protagonist is driven to act by something deep inside of themselves, which they cannot compensate for and which makes them who they are. So you can't change your character, you can't really change your personality, and it's the kind of contradiction between who a person is as a free person who is able to choose what they do, and those aspects of our personalities and our characters that we can't choose, we can't really control, which makes certain stories into tragedies and which makes certain protagonists into tragic protagonists or tragic heroes and tragic heroines. So, in a sense, the tragic protagonist is always fated to fall, or it always seems that way. But what makes this fate tragic is that the protagonist creates it themselves by behaving according to their own wishes and desires. And it's this contradiction that creates the unique feelings which we associate with the tragic. It also makes the difference between a tragedy and a sad story in which something bad happens to a good person. The latter kind of story happens all the time in the real world and in fiction, but we would rarely, if ever, refer to those events as tragic. Or if we do refer to them as tragic, we're wrong. They're not tragic, they're just very sad, maybe. Okay, so what does Macbeth do? Tragic heroes have to do something. Or not do something in the case of Hamlet, but that's a different question. So the play opens in Scotland several hundred years before the time it was written. Macbeth is a brutal and courageous warrior, and he's just won a battle for his king, Duncan, and has saved the realm from a rebellion that could have destroyed it. On his way home from the battle, Macbeth and his best friend Banquo meet three witches who appear out of nowhere and make a prophecy that Macbeth will become Thane, which means kind of duke, just a noble ranking of Cawdor, and then later King of Scotland. The witches also prophesy that Banquo will be the father of a line of future kings, although he will not be king himself. We'll talk more about that next week because it has a major effect on some of the second half of the play, but it's not so important for the first act and the start of the second act. As soon as they've said this, the witches disappear, and Macbeth is immediately informed by a messenger that the old Thane of Cawdor joined the rebellion against Duncan and that he has been captured and had his title taken away. Macbeth is then immediately told that he will be made Thane of Cawdor as a reward for his own bravery in battle, which immediately fulfills one part of the witch's prophecy. Macbeth and Banquo respond happily to the news, although both are deeply suspicious of the witches and are unsettled that what they have said has come true. Macbeth writes immediately home to his wife, Lady Macbeth, and informs her of the battle and of the witches' prophecy. Again, Banquo's suspicion of the witches will also play into his feelings towards Macbeth as the play progresses, but again, that's more something that we'll talk about next week. This week, we're just going to focus on the relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth as it's portrayed towards the second half of the first act and in the second act. So, Lady Macbeth receives these letters excitedly in Act 1, Scene 5, and begins immediately to think about how to fulfill the witch's prophecy. She doesn't want to wait for it to come true. She wants to make it happen now. Her conclusion is that the couple must murder Duncan, and in doing so, ensure that Macbeth becomes king as soon as possible. Lady Macbeth suggests that her husband will have already thought of this, but she claims that he is too full of the milk of human kindness to be able to follow through on his impulses. We can see the milk of human kindness line here. Sorry. Yeah, I do fear thy nature is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without that illness should attend it, which thou wouldst holily wouldst not play false, and yet wouldst wrongly win. So she says that he's too human, he's too full of humanity, Macbeth, to catch the nearest way, which means to take the shortest route towards becoming king, which will be to kill Duncan and to take the throne. So she immediately begins to not only imagine that she will fulfill the witch's prophecy, but also that she needs to work on and to kind of manipulate and to convince her husband that this is the correct course of action to take. So, when Macbeth returns home, the couple greet each other excitedly, and Macbeth informs his wife that Duncan will stay with them that same evening. Lady Macbeth immediately decides that they will fulfill the prophecy that night and kill Duncan there and then. Although Macbeth resists and proves to be indecisive, he ultimately agrees to go through with their plan. Soon after the murder, Macbeth does indeed become king, and we'll explore the full consequences of that next week. Okay, so what can we say about their relationship? This is the central relationship in Macbeth, and it's one of the central relationships in Shakespearean tragedy, certainly. So the first thing we can say is that the two confide in each other. Macbeth writes to his wife straight away and tells her everything that has happened regarding the battle and the prophecy. He confides his innermost feelings, describing how he burned with excitement when he heard the witches speaking. Look, he says, "When I burned in desire to question them further, they made themselves air into which they vanished. Whiles I stood wrapped in the wonder of it, came the missives from the king, and all hailed me Thane of Cawdor." So he describes not just what happened, but he describes his inner emotional state. He wants his wife to know these things, and he expects his wife to understand them. Again, this might not seem that strange in the 21st century to have a marriage which is based on a kind of intimate emotional connection. But for Shakespeare's time, this really would have been thought of as one of the more exceptional relationships. Marriages were much more pragmatic. They will often involve money, often involve titles, and were often a kind of business transaction. Not exclusively, but often they were. And Shakespeare makes very clear from the start that Lady Macbeth and Macbeth do not have that kind of relationship. They have more of a connection than that. And yeah, Macbeth's first thought, once he has heard the news and had time to process it, is to let his wife know what has happened. And it's also worth noting that he describes her as my dearest partner of greatness, that thou mightest not lose the dews of rejoicing by being ignorant of what greatness is promised thee. So Macbeth argues, or he tells his wife that his greatness, his coming greatness in becoming king and already in being Thane of Cawdor, is also her greatness. So it's clear that he considers them to live a kind of shared life, and he rejoices in her rewards as much as he rejoices in his own. Number two, they think the same things even if Macbeth will not admit it. So if we notice at the end of Act 1, Scene 5, Lady Macbeth declares that Duncan will not see tomorrow, and Macbeth's first reaction is simply to say, "We will speak further," rather than to dismiss the idea out of hand. So we see it here. Lady Macbeth gives a speech in which she says that Duncan will not wake up. He's coming to stay at the castle and he won't wake up. He's coming to stay at Macbeth's castle and he won't wake up. And she advises Macbeth to put on a show, to pretend to be an innocent flower but be a serpent which is hiding under it. She wants him to dissimulate, to learn to pretend, to learn to hide his feelings so that he can ambush Duncan. And rather than dismissing this idea, which in some ways we know that Macbeth would find very shocking and that he would hate, he just says, "We will speak further." And notice the difference in language here between this kind of elaborate metaphor of the flower and the serpent in comparison to Macbeth's very pragmatic, we will speak further. It does seem as if Macbeth has already thought of killing the king and that he only needed his wife to point this out for him in order for him to think about it even more. Otherwise, why would he not be shocked? Why would he not tell his wife that what she suggested goes against everything that Macbeth stands for, which it does. Macbeth will try to go back on what he said later, but at this point he knows that his wife can read him, and she knows how he will respond to the situation, even if he can't admit it himself. So then we can conclude that Lady Macbeth understands her husband. Her persuasions are more than simple rhetoric. They are designed to press specific buttons and to trigger specific reactions. So at the start of Act 2, Scene 7, Macbeth insists he will proceed no further in this business. And his wife responds by asking him, "Art thou afeard to be the same in thine own act and valour as thou art in desire?" So he says, "We will proceed no further in this business." And he then goes on to say that Duncan has honoured him, that Duncan has been good to him, and that he has a high standing amongst all the people. I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people. So there's no reason why he should throw all that away by murdering the king. And then Lady Macbeth says, "Art thou afeard to be the same in thy own act and valour as thou art in desire?" So she says, basically, you can say what you want to say, but me, I know you, and I know what you're thinking, and I know deep down what you want. And you're a coward if you don't go through with what you want, if you don't make your own desire a kind of reality, then what you're doing is just hiding away from who you really are. And you're hiding away from what you really want. And she knows that her husband's desire has not changed, even though he's backing out of the plan at this point. And she's able to manipulate him again, or to encourage him again, by suggesting that that he's a coward to not do in reality what actually he's already done in his mind. So the final thing we can say about the relationship for now is that this couple have a very particular relationship towards the future. And by this I mean that from the moment that Macbeth reports the news of the witches to his wife, both he and her begin to look to the moment when he will become king. When Lady Macbeth greets her husband, she tells him, "Thy letters have transported me beyond this ignorant present, and I feel now the future in the instant." We can see this in Act 1, Scene 5 here. "Thy letters have transported me beyond this ignorant present, and I feel now the future in the instant." It's as if Lady Macbeth is saying that she's already living in the future. She already feels as if the prophecy has been fulfilled, and she begins to act and insist that Macbeth acts as if this future has already taken place, and all they need to do is to bring it about. And from that moment, the present becomes loaded with the future, we could say. And it's this fact and this kind of relationship towards the future, not as being something which is far off and may happen, but as being something which is immediately contained in the present, and can explode out of the present, which dictates the couple's actions. The two begin to act as if the prophecy were already fulfilled. They do have their doubts and they do have their hesitations, but this idea and this feeling which is produced by, this feeling of the idea that the future is now present in the current moment, means that both characters are irresistibly drawn towards fulfilling the prophecy through any means necessary, or by taking the shortest way, as Lady Macbeth might put it, by killing the king. And we can see this in Macbeth's language too. At the start of Act 1, Scene 7, he says, "If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it be done quickly." And in this is a soliloquy, so he's on stage more or less on his own at this point. He's speaking out his own thoughts. And although he will decide by the end of this soliloquy that he isn't going to murder the king, and he'll have changed his mind by the end of the scene back to saying he will murder the king, at this point his thought is that it will happen anyway. I will at some point give in to my temptation to pursue my desire to grasp power, to become king by killing Duncan. Given the fact that it will happen anyway, it may as well happen now. Therefore, I will do it quickly. I.e., I will go through with the plan to conduct that action tonight, which we know which he will do. And again, here Macbeth suggests that if the murder is going to happen anyway, it's better that it happens now. And yeah, according to this reasoning, Macbeth uses the fact that he knows he will, or he claims he knows, he will eventually try to murder Duncan as a justification for committing the murder in the present. In English, we could say that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth act proleptically, meaning that they act as if the future has already happened. At this point in the play, this relationship towards the future and towards time allows them to progress and to commit an action which they could have not have done on their own, and they could have not have done if they didn't have this kind of intense need to make the future real. And yeah, we'll see next week how this relationship to the future develops when Macbeth becomes king and is consumed by guilt and paranoia. And unsurprisingly, as this is a tragedy, it doesn't go well. But I'm guessing you guys know that already. Okay, so tasks for this week. Read the extracts from the play that I've uploaded to iCampus, and you've just seen a bit of on there anyway. I know Shakespeare is not easy to read. Many native speakers find him very difficult too. However, you don't have to understand everything, and you might be surprised by how much you do understand if you allow yourself not to be intimidated. A lot of Shakespeare's language is strikingly clear, and the sooner you stop being afraid of it, the easier he is to read. I will fight to the death over the idea that Shakespeare is much easier to read than most people think, and that he becomes even easier when you stop being intimidated by him and you just start to see the language as wanting to express something and as wanting to communicate something actually quite clear. Doesn't mean you have to understand everything, because some of it is opaque. However, I would insist that if you really want to, just relax, take the time and let the text speak to you, because some of it is very, very direct and brilliantly expressed. So yeah, just don't be too intimidated. Once you've done that, watch the clips that I've uploaded to eCampus. 3 of them are from the great Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, which is an adaptation of Macbeth set in feudal Japan. Kurosawa made numerous changes to the story, but the basics are the same. And the scenes that I've uploaded are a really excellent demonstration, I think, of how Lady Macbeth, or how the character who is representing Lady Macbeth in this version of the story, convinces her husband to go through with the action, which he would never have done on his own. And then once you've done that, watch the clip Macbeth Act 1 Scene 5 on eCampus. This scene contains a speech from Lady Macbeth in which she invokes evil spirits to help her go through with the murder of Duncan. And yeah, personally, I don't find this part of the play very interesting. Kurosawa, who I think produced by far the best film versions of both Macbeth and of King Lear, left it and the whole idea that Lady Macbeth is interested in witchcraft out of the story completely. That said, the speech is very famous. It's this speech which starts the Raven himself as horse and kind of shows Lady Macbeth relinquishing her femininity. She says she wants to be filled from the crown, meaning the head, to the toe, full of direst cruelty. She wants to feel no remorse. She wants to be only fixed on purpose. She kind of summons demons to suck her milk in order to fill themselves with poison. It's all very exaggerated. It's all very kind of pantomime-esque. It's showing Lady Macbeth as someone who wants to take her task, which she's set herself, very, very seriously. But honestly, in my opinion, it isn't the most important aspect of the relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. However, it is in the play. And yeah, the clip on Act 1, Scene 5, which is on eCampus, will show you various interpretations of how that scene has been filmed. And it's useful to watch it also just to get a bit used to seeing how actors speak the language, and also with being able to see the different kinds of interpretive options that Shakespeare has, what he uses when he, or how different directors can interpret the same text and interpret the same scene. Also, you can watch Act 2, Scene 2 in a fairly recent production from Patrick Stewart. And in this scene, Macbeth returns from killing Duncan, but he's so traumatized that he has forgotten to place the murder weapons in the right place. The Lady Macbeth and him have agreed that they will place the daggers that they've used to kill Duncan, or that Macbeth has used to kill Duncan, by the sleeping guards, and in that way they will blame the murder on Duncan's bodyguards and they will get away with it. Macbeth forgets to do this because he's so traumatized by the murder that he's committed, and Lady Macbeth has to go back and put the daggers there herself. And in the scene, you can see how she's quite pragmatic and quite quick thinking, and he's just completely confused by the horror of what he's done. Okay, guys, so get in touch if you have any questions about any of this or about how the course in general is going to work. I'll be posting more material for next week, either Sunday night or Monday morning. And yeah, that's about it. I'll just repeat for the last time that I know this isn't ideal, but I do want you to get something out of this. And yeah, I'm sure that you will if you can keep engaged and keep motivated. I'll also be posting some details about how the assessments are going to work pretty soon as well. And I'll post details about the first kind of regroupement, the first online kind of regroupement as well, which will be happening in a couple of weeks. But I'll make sure I give you guys plenty of time before that. Okay then, ciao. Have a good week.